Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. Getting ready for the NBA draft episode this week. We are going to be doing a deep dive and preview of our normal three teams, the Knicks, the Nets, and the Bulls, with the NBA draft. And for any listeners wondering, Dylan is going to not be joining us this week. He has got a couple other commitments. He is fine. He'll be back for next week's show. But I do have a guest here, so it's not going to be me flying solo. I'll introduce him in just a second. But we're going to start the show talking about his team. We're going to advance to the Bulls after that, talk about the Nets, and then wrap up with the Knicks. And we are going to do a mock draft of the top 10 picks as well to finish off the episode. It's going to be all NBA this week. But the guest I have is a friend and coworker of mine. Johnny, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. My name is Johnny Wynn. I'm a big Magic fan, as you probably can tell. And I watch a lot of NBA, not a lot of other sports, but mainly NBA, and that's why I'm here.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. Thank you for your time and coming on. We're looking forward to having a great basketball conversation, and not to hype it up too much. He definitely knows his shit, everybody. So it's going to be a nice, detailed conversation. We want to jump right in. Since you're the guest here, we'll talk about your team first, the Orlando Magic. And that's a team that we don't usually cover. So it's going to be a nice little change of pace from the three teams we normally discuss. And the Magic are definitely a team in an interesting spot right now. But before we get into the state of them, why don't you tell the listeners, since they do not know you like I do, how you became an Orlando Magic fan and a little bit of background about that.
So I started out as an Orlando Magic fan because my dad was a big Orlando Magic fan. And the biggest thing that got me into it was Dwight Howard. His plays, his dunks, his blocking shots in the third row, it captivated me more than anything else. And from that point on, I loved that team, and I just became a Magic fan since then. Not only that, but I remember playing with my cousin on NBA 2K10, and the first two teams were the Lakers and the Magic, because that was the playoff team, or that was the finals teams. So I always played with the Magic.
Gotcha.
So I love the Magic.
No, gotcha. I remember that NBA finals well. I'm sure you do too. And we've talked plenty off the pod about the end of the 2000s, early 2010s, that Magic roster, and how much talent and shooting surrounded Dwight Howard then. But obviously, things have changed a little bit in the last decade or so since he left. And as a Knicks fan, a fan of a team that has sucked for the most part recently, I got to say, I have some respect for you sticking with the Magic, because there is a lot of, let's say, fair weather fans who wouldn't do that. I'm sure you've come across some.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many fans that will stay when we're good and then leave when we're bad, and then come back when we have like one player that they really like and then leave. It's kind of like the same thing with LeBron fans. I would say, at least with the Knicks, you guys are always a destination for free agency, no matter what. So that's a good thing.
I mean, I hope so, man. It hasn't quite been the same the last couple of years, but I agree that New York is at least a destination city just because it's the biggest market in the country. And Orlando is not necessarily that city, but they've also managed to have a decent amount of high profile players over the years. And right now, let's discuss a little bit current state of the team. Heading into this NBA draft, the Magic have the 5th, 8th, and 33rd picks at the time of recording. And I know we're going to talk about the potential of them making a trade up into the top 4 here in a minute. But considering that they finished with a bottom 3 record in the league, how much do you think it's going to hurt just if they don't make a trade that they ended up falling to 5th in the lottery with their own original pick?
I mean, they're already the 5th pick as it is, and it kind of sucks because they were the bottom 3 and they should have gotten a top 3 pick, honestly. And it happens every year where they never win going up in the lottery. They always go down or stay the same. Unfortunately, we kind of left the top 4, which top 4 really has the highest tier of players. But we may be able to get a raw prospect. That's really what you get outside of the top 4. So that's the hope with that.
I was going to ask you, and I think we both agreed on this, but I was going to ask, while it is a deeper draft at the top this year than it was in last year's draft, I would say, there does seem to be the consensus that the top 4, who are, for anyone who doesn't know, that's most likely going to be Cade Cunningham, Jalen Suggs, Jalen Green, and Evan Mobley. They seem to be a cut above every other prospect. I was going to ask, do you agree with that thinking? Do you think those 4 in a class of their own?
Oh, 100%. I don't think it's even a question. The only wild card there could be and only say could because of potential trades around the league. And if the Toronto Raptors do end up getting Pascal Siakam away, maybe they take a risk on Kuminga, because Kuminga is the only raw prospect in the league that has the ceiling of a god. So it really depends on if he sneaks in, but I do agree with those top four. That is going to be the consensus for the top four. And then it kind of mixes around after that.
I understand. And going back at last year's draft, I think there was actually a similar thing that happened. So it seemed like the top three was pretty clear that it was going to be Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman, and LaMelo Ball in some order. But
Mm-hmm.
the Bulls had the fourth pick last year, and they did go off the board a little bit with the Patrick Williams pick, who has a ton of upside, but was a little bit raw, still is a little bit raw. He's still 19 years old, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
I am curious to see if the Raptors or if any other team ends up with that fourth pick goes for more of a swing for the fences kind of pick. Going back a few years, it's a spot where teams have done it. The Knicks did it with Porzingis in 2015. So there is precedent for taking a swing on a guy with higher upside, but a little bit of a lower floor as well. So if that happens, let me ask the hypothetical. Let's say Toronto does go off the board and take Kuminga if there's no trades. Whichever one of the top four would be left for the Magic at 5. Are you sprinting to the podium for that player?
Yes, 100%. There is no question. I would go for the fences. I would get one of the top four. The reason why is the Magic have a lot of young pieces. They have Okiki, who looks really good. RJ Hampton looks like a good scorer. Cole Anthony just drafted last year. He looks good when he getting his minutes. You still got Mo Bamba, who we don't even know what he can do. I mean, he has crazy measurements, but we don't know what he can do. Wendell Carter Jr. looks fantastic. I mean, he does a little bit of everything, a double-double machine. Jonathan Isaac, Defensive Player of the Year for the future. I don't care what anybody says, for the next 5 years easily. So we have a lot of really good young pieces, and we don't have that star go-to scorer. We just don't. Nobody can really score in that roster. We play really good defense, no scores, and it's really hard to get a free agency guy to come and really be the go-to guy. So if we can get a Jalen Suggs, that would be fantastic. If for some reason, I don't know why they don't take Jalen Green, which I think is the next Froby, but that's just me. I would take that in a heartbeat. That's what the Magic need.
I could definitely see them adding a level of dynamic scoring to their roster because while they do have a lot of intriguing young pieces, you mentioned most of them, and there are some question marks with Jonathan Isaac and Markel Fultz both coming off of torn ACLs. So as talented as they've shown to be in limited time, there's still question marks. They're still unproven. And then Wendell Carter, I thought, was a solid pickup in a return for the Vucevic trade, and I know we'll be attacking that from both sides in this episode. But there are two veterans on the roster right now who are at least capable of taking over for brief stretches, but I wouldn't say that they can be that go-to guy. And right now, that would be Gary Harris and Terrence Ross, who's seemed to be there for a while, actually, now that I think back on it. But outside of those two, it's a very, very young roster that has, like, for the most part, solid defensive instincts, but very, very inconsistent, not a lot of floor spacing, I would say, at the moment. So now let me just ask. So of the top four, I would still assume that Cade Cunningham is going to Detroit regardless. I don't see the Pistons trading the first pick. I think Cunningham is going there 100%. But I don't think it's impossible that with the fifth and the eighth picks that you could move up as high as number 2 with Houston. I don't think it's impossible. So if you do that, of the other three, the Jalen Green, Jalen Suggs, or Evan Mobley, do you have a preference between those three players?
I would definitely go Jalen Green. I don't believe Evan Mobley really fills a spot that we really need. I mean, we still have a raw prospect in Mo Bamba that I'd rather use than to use that high pick like that. And then Jalen Suggs is good, but he doesn't have the offensive capability like a Jalen Green. Now, Jalen Green is raw. He reminds me a lot of, Froby before the jump shot. He also reminds me a lot of Russell Westbrook, the athleticism, the able to get to the basket and really get a score. He's the best scorer in this draft, bare none, and that's the Magic's best and honestly only option for a star in here, honestly. So I hope they can get up a little higher with the trades, but I don't know if Houston lets go of it.
I completely agree with that. Now, and I want to, we'll talk, I think, in a minute here about which of the teams in front of the Magic in the draft order might be the most likely to facilitate a trade down. But the comparison that I wanted to make for Jalen Green, and we'll get into this at the end when we do the mock draft, but I see a little bit of a combination of Zach LaVine and Malik Monk in his game, just with the
Oh,
explosive athleticism, a little, the ability to create his own shot, not necessarily the greatest playmaker, similar to both of those players, but superb athletes to have that dynamic element and the upside to turn into a complete score. But at the same time, still some question marks. But one other thing I wanted to talk about with the Magic that we won't have to with the other teams we're going to cover here. The Orlando Magic have hired a new coach. They brought in Jamal Mosley, who's been an assistant coach, I believe, with the Mavericks for the last few years. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the hire.
I honestly think it's a great hire. I think we have a lot of young players that he need a coach like Jamal Mosley who likes to really get to know the players and really get to work with the players on a different level. I saw the other day when he was doing drills with Wendell Carter Jr., like actually doing drills, being the defender. I think he, being a former player and also being a very good developmental coach, goes a long way. I mean, Luka Doncic said really good things about him as well. So I think it's a really good hire as long as he can really develop players like we think he can. The fan base is going to love this hire, and it's going to make like players like RJ Hampton grow exponentially.
And that's going to be the big key with the Magic, being right now one of the youngest, most raw, frankly, one of the least talented, or excuse me, least NBA ready rosters in the league. Now, we talked about the several intriguing pieces. Now, that might have come across than I anticipated. But what I meant by that is they have a roster that's not built to win right now. They have a roster that has a lot of upside, but the odds of all of these players reaching their full potential is relatively low, regardless of how well Mosley does. So it's kind of, to me, going to be an interesting balance. Which one or two are going to be focused on the most, or do you think might be the most instrumental to long-term success? Now, as a fan of a team that is not built to win right now, we mentioned player development. What kind of development are you looking to see in this upcoming season from the guys that are already on the roster?
I would hope that Markelle Fultz continues to work on his shot. He's very good at playmaking as of right now. He can get to the basket at will. He's really good around the basket. It's just that he doesn't have that shot still. He still has a little bit of a weird jumper. I know he had that injury before, but we really need a jumper from him. I really would like to see Jonathan Isaac further upgrade his offensive game. He's really good defensively. The guy's a monster, but he really needs to jump shot. He really needs to create some space off his shot. He is a very lengthy guy. He can do things like what Kevin Durant would do, but he doesn't know how to shoot. So if he can get his jump shot, that'd be fantastic. And honestly, we need a superstar. If we can get somebody who has that potential to be a star on the offensive end, we traded everybody. We don't have anybody that can really score anymore other than Gary Harris and Terrence Ross. Terrence Ross is a streaky scorer, and Gary Harris is Gary Harris. So if we can get at least some more shooting, some more offense out of these guys, we would be in much better shape.
Understood. So it sounds like to me you're more looking at the development of these players offensively because they're relatively polished on the defensive end of the court, which is a little bit unusual, I'd say, for a developing team. Usually, well, the focus is obviously going to be the glamorous end of the court on offense. Usually, these players don't know how to defend either. They don't have the footwork or the lateral athleticism or anything. But that isn't really the biggest issue in Orlando. I don't think it's the main thing that's going to be focused on for them. And now I want to go back to the question we teased a few minutes ago. Now, I know obviously Magic fans were disappointed that they ended up falling to fifth in the lottery with their pick, considering the Magic finished with a bottom three record in the NBA. But pretty much ever since that happened, there have been a lot of talks that since they have two top eight picks in this draft, that they're going to try to use those to move back up into the top four. Now, I think we agree that Detroit is unlikely to move from the number one spot, but I'll just ask the question in full. Of the four teams in front of the Magic, which is Detroit at 1, Houston at 2, Cleveland at 3, and Toronto at 4, which of those four teams do you think is the most likely to trade down?
I believe out of those four teams, it's either I honestly think it'll be the Cavs. The reason why is because they're already looking to try to trade Sexton as it is. There's a lot of trade rumors in that. We'll talk about that. But I honestly think that Cleveland is in a weird predicament where they have pieces, but they don't have a full roster. So they're kind of in a rebuilding mode as it is. So they're trying to sell Sexton. They probably will get rid of Jared Allen. They'll probably rebuild fully because Jared Allen's going to get a payday. I honestly think the picks that the Magic have would help them a little more to start that rebuild. Houston already has a couple of things to rebuild on. Honestly, after everything's said and done, if they trade Sexton, they only have Darius Garland. That's really a solid player for them right now. So I think the fifth and eighth pick might be nice. We might be able to throw somebody else in, like a Mo Bamba, maybe to replace Jared Allen or something like that. But I think that might be the best bet.
Yeah, I could definitely see it being Cleveland. I think Toronto is just a complete wild card because while they definitely had a disappointing season, I don't think anyone expected them to fall. Like they finished with the seventh worst record, I believe, and they were the team that moved up in the lottery a little bit more unexpectedly. But I don't think anyone thinks of the Raptors as a bottom four team in the NBA. I know that they're likely to lose Kyle Lowry in free agency, but they are still a team that could easily make the playoffs again as soon as next season. So I think they might be open to trading down from that pick as well. And since Orlando would only have to move up one spot in that trade scenario, I don't think that a guy like Mo Bamba would necessarily have to be thrown in. If they're really desperate to move up, they could definitely include him because they have several young players. If they end up saying one is expendable, then they could definitely use that if they think whatever target it is more valuable in this year's draft. But I think I would be surprised if Houston trades out because they had so many things devolve in such a short amount of time this year. We kind of had a feeling that James Harden was going to be traded, but everything in Houston cratered so quickly, and they turned into one of the worst teams in the league with very little in terms of future-oriented players on the roster so quickly, it seems like. But having the second overall pick and a relatively big market, I think they have a better chance to rebuild quickly. I think the Magic are going to be a little bit more likely to be a 2 or 3 year project, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either, because I think that could set them up for more sustainable success down the line. Now, if they end up keeping the fifth and eighth picks, do you have any specific players you would want to take with those two selections?
If we have the fifth and eighth pick, I will say with the fifth pick, if there's any of the four that drops out because of Kuminga, you take them. There is no questions about that. But if it goes like we think it's going to go, Cade, Green, Mobley, and Suggs, top four, I honestly would love Scotty Barnes. Now, I understand the downside of him is he doesn't score. He is a playmaker in sorts. He's like a point forward, but he's a tremendous defensive threat or anchor, I should say. And he's similar to a Jonathan Isaac. And honestly, I would not mind having two Jonathan Isaacs on the floor. That sounds kind of fun. And also, it really makes the identity for the Magic the long boy defenders. That's what we're known of getting. Very athletic, very long, super long wingspan for no reason that hopefully can defend. That's what we draft every year. So that's what I think we're going to get with the fifth pick. With the eighth pick, there's a lot of different things that are going on. Jonathan Kuminga has fallen in some of the mock drafts to eighth, honestly. And there's a lot of people that are saying that Davion Mitchell will be our pick. And honestly, that's who I would want, Davion Mitchell. He is the most NBA ready player. He has the best defense, in my opinion, for a guard. And also he knows how to get the shot on offense. He almost looks like a veteran player, but he's a rookie. That's somebody who I think would jumpstart the Orlando Magic's offense. We have a lot of really, really good players that are athletic. They good on defense and are long. They can slash to the basket and get scores all day, but we need somebody to facilitate the offense. And the thing about Fultz is he's okay at it, but he also can't space the floor. Davion Mitchell can. I think that might be our go-to point guard, and then have RJ Hampton as our two. So those are the two picks I would go for. Hopefully we do move up to get at least Jalen Green. If we can't get Jalen Green, it's not even worth it, honestly. But those are the two I would pick.
Yeah, I do really like the idea of both Barnes and Mitchell in those spots because now I think part of the reason Mitchell seems a little bit more polished is because he's not a one and done player. He actually played 3 years at Baylor, and that's definitely part of the reason that he was able to really develop an offensive game here his junior year, culminating in them winning the national championship this season. He already, similar to Scotty Barnes, doesn't really have the questions on the defensive end. So it definitely would be an opportunity for the Magic to establish an identity. And well, I still think they're one of the more polished defensive teams in the league, which is weird to say about a team that will probably finish with a bottom 10 record next season. But they are already set, I think, or at least relatively set on one end of the court. And there was one other quote I read in doing my research for this episode, and we discussed it briefly before we started recording. But I read an article in The Athletic, and it was kind of assuming that if the Magic stayed at 5, that they would be deciding between Scotty Barnes and Jonathan Kuminga. And it basically said they think that they would end up taking Scotty Barnes because the Magic have a type, which is players with elite measurables, a huge wingspan, with a strong work ethic, and great athleticism. And I do think Scotty Barnes fits that bill. But do you agree with that thinking? Do you think that's a player the Magic would prioritize over a guy like Kuminga who has all the tools, but none of the, or less of the production?
I will say it is a type that we have. It's an actual meme on our Reddit. The Orlando Magic Reddit is a meme that we get the long boys. We have drafted that nonstop. I honestly think it's because our GM and our front office team was from the Milwaukee Bucks that drafted Giannis, and they're trying to find their next Giannis. That's what they've been doing with every single pick. They're looking the longest wingspan. Hopefully, they can put on a lot of size and be unstoppable like Giannis. I think that's their game plan. And the only thing about Kuminga that scares me is that he looks completely lost on defense and he shoots he's not very good at shooting. His splits are 25% from the three. We need shooting, and I'd rather have anybody else on Magic shoot at that
point. Yeah, that's the polite way to say you couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat right now. And I understand where you're coming from, but Giannis was also picked 15th in his draft, and that's more of the part. That's more of the position in the first round that you would usually consider teams to take a chance on hyper athletic projects that aren't going to have an immediate impact. It took Giannis Antetokounmpo time, but he did eventually develop and be that star player that just won an NBA championship last week. But it's obviously not going to, the odds of that happening again are relatively low. And it would be a little jarring, I think, to see a team, whether it's the Magic or anyone else, take a chance like on somebody that raw that early in the draft. But at the same time, I think teams are more likely to do it now than they were a few years ago after seeing the success of a couple of players. And as even the Patrick Williams pick last year, who was promising in his rookie season. And that's actually going to transition us into the Bulls, who are the next team I wanted to talk about. Now, we mentioned the Magic, their own pick ended up falling to 5, but the reason the Magic have the 8th pick in the draft is they got that in the trade for when Nikola Vucevic was sent to Chicago. And the Magic got a couple of first round picks and Wendell Carter in return. And the Bulls are kind of in an interesting spot. So they were one of the lower end Eastern Conference teams last season as well, at least going into the season. They're kind of the opposite of the Magic in terms of they're relatively polished on the offensive end of the court. They're at least capable of putting up a lot of points and spacing the floor, but they were horrendous on the defensive end of the court. And the Bulls also, unfortunately for them, blew several leads late in games. In the first year under Billy Donovan, they weren't able to really close out games where they had a 5 to 10 point cushion because they couldn't get consistent stops. Now, the Bulls at the same time, they really went aggressive, and they were, I think, the most surprising team that said, fuck it, we're trying to make the playoffs right now. It was a little, when the Magic traded Aaron Gordon to Denver, at least Denver's a team that was one of the best in the Western Conference. They're looking for pieces theoretically that would put them over the top. The logic is more easy to follow there. But the Bulls, they were clearly going all in when they made the Vucevic trade. And in fairness, Levine missed about 15 games at the end of the season in the protocols. And that's definitely part of the reason they finished on a down note, and they didn't even end up making the play-in tournament. And that is not going to work for them, obviously. They were making that trade to, at the very least, make the play-in tournament last season. Now that they didn't, and they have a relatively weird roster, and they also do not have a first round pick. We're going to focus more on the Bulls' free agency because their only pick right now is 38th in the second round. Now, free agency wise, I think the Bulls are going to be looking for a point guard, specifically to facilitate the offense because Colby White's more of a combo guard. Zach LaVine is better either as a 2 or a 3. Neither of them are great at facilitating the offense. So, would you agree that point guard is going to be a position the Bulls really target in free agency?
I think they'll definitely target a playmaker at the very least. They need to get some of the ball handling responsibilities off of Zach LaVine so that he can score more. Excellent scorer, but he's not the best playmaker in the league. And it's going to be nice to have a playmaker alongside him. There's a couple options out there, but I'd say point guard might be the best bet for them, or at least a guard at very most.
Now, I think there's a couple of options. The main ones that you might think of top of your head, Spencer Dinwiddie, Dennis Schroeder, guys like that, possibly Lonzo Ball. They are all at least capable of facilitating the offense because the Bulls do have a decent amount of shooters on the roster. Now, looking at the current team, there was one player that I can't quite get a read on. I'm really curious to see what the Bulls do with him. And for me, that's Lauri Markkanen, who's a restricted free agent who is talented, former top 10 pick, but who's been very inconsistent and injury prone in his time with the Bulls. He did end up shooting 40% from three this year, but he also is still not really much of a rebounder. There's some questions with him on the defensive end of the court. Now, Markkanen and Wendell Carter, when they were together, were not a very good defensive front court, I would say. There was definitely some talent there offensively and with the rebounding. But now that Wendell Carter is gone and it's Vucevic instead, Markkanen is a really interesting case, and I think the Bulls are going to be aggressive with external free agents. So, I'll just ask the simple question first: do you think the Bulls bring Markkanen back?
I don't think they bring him back. I think they sign and trade. I think they're going to find a team that at least to get some value back. I don't think they bring him back because he's just a weird fit with Vooch. Vooch does the same exact thing, but at the 5. There's no purpose to have Markkanen there. And if they have Markkanen there, then you have the worst defensive front court in the league because none of them play defense. And that's the one thing about it. I honestly think they sign and trade him and they find a defensive minded 4. I mean, they have Thaddeus Young now, but Thaddeus Young is getting older and he's not very good defensively. He's never been that good defensively. He's been an average player at best. There is one player in particular that I think that if they can go after, it'd be really nice, and that'd be John Collins. That'd be interesting. I think that a John Collins and Vucevic front court would be pretty nice because John Collins can play defense, and he can be an offensive player, but he doesn't need the ball in his hands at all. So you can still have John Collins be a guy that could score and help Vooch out and do almost like a triangle almost with the 3. And at least that would help out with the scoring and the shooting and the spacing for Zach LaVine to do whatever. So they can go either way.
Gotcha. John Collins is a really interesting case of his own because he did not end up signing the extension with Atlanta last year. And now him and Markkanen are both restricted free agents, which means the teams that the Hawks and the Bulls respectively can match offers for anyone who doesn't know before they end up going to another team. But I do agree that Collins is a lot more effective off the ball offensively. He does not need to have the ball in his hands. I think he's a way better pick and roll threat, lob guy who's a better athlete, I'd say, than Markkanen as well. And Markkanen's a guy, I think, who's a better outside shooter, but he absolutely needs the ball in his hands. He's not really a catch and shoot guy, I would say. He has his moments, but I see him as really, I see John Collins as somebody who's not really great at creating his own shot, but would fit better with the current Bulls because they don't need him to do that. And I think a sign and trade, Markkanen, as imperfect and frustrating as he can be, still has some value. And the Bulls are, I think, way too smart to just let him go for nothing. So I think a sign and trade would be an intriguing possibility. And I mentioned Dinwiddie earlier. I wonder if they do a sign and trade with the Brooklyn Nets, who have, and we'll get into them in a few minutes here, but I wonder if that's a sign and trade that both teams would consider because the Nets are a team that is so cash strapped because they have their big stars locked up to huge contracts. They have Joe Harris and DeAndre Jordan as well. They have limited resources right now to improve the team. So I wonder if they would be creative in that sense. But the Bulls, considering at least at the time of recording, they are unlikely to make a major splash in the draft. There was one question I wanted to ask. So you mentioned Thaddeus Young. I'm going to throw Tomas Satoransky in the mix as well. They're both solid, useful role players at this point in their careers. Do you think that the Bulls would consider trading one or both of them to try to get a late first round pick somewhere between 20 and 30? Do you think that would be beneficial to them?
I honestly don't think it would be. They are in a win now mode, and a rookie in that caliber usually won't add anything, not at least immediately. They are probably better off trying to get a disgruntled star. I think there's a couple trades that they could possibly do. Maybe a Bradley Beal, if possible. That'd be really, really nice. I know Zach LaVine was trying to recruit him during the USA, Olympic Games, but there are a couple stars out there that they can get. But I honestly think that it would be a negative if they trade those away for draft picks in the 20 to 30 range. If they can get something in the top 15, potentially, but there's not that many players that are NBA ready right now, other than the top four and Davion Mitchell, like I said before.
And the Bulls aren't going to get that high, obviously, with any of those players. I don't think they have any chance of getting higher than 22 or so with a player like Satoransky or Young. And no disrespect intended, but they just don't have that same trade value, in my opinion. Now, looking at the Bulls, there's one other thing that just I can't quite shake when I look at the team. So, obviously, considering Karnisovas made the huge trade to get Vucevic last season before the deadline, they're clearly in win now mode. I think we all agree on that. But I still have questions, really, how high the team's ceiling is for a couple of reasons. Now, and nothing personal against any of the players. Now, a trade for a disgruntled star is going to be more difficult right now because the Bulls don't have their first round pick this year or in 2023. I know it's top four protected, but those are two of their most valuable assets because the roster right now is going to be the partnership of Levine and Vucevic and Patrick Williams and how much he can grow. Outside of that, you could look at possibly marketing on an expiring contract right now, or Kobe White, as guys that you might be able to get some value for. But the Bulls sent away guys like Daniel Gafford, so they don't really have too many tradable pieces because they don't have many immediate draft picks and they don't have many young players that are going to be available in trades. So I guess considering that it's going to be Levine and Vucevic and Patrick Williams going into next season. Even if they do supplement that with one or two players with a sign and trade or a free agency move, how high do you think the Bulls' ceiling is next season? Because there's a clear mandate that they want to make the playoffs.
I believe that their ceiling is not very high as of right now. I think the main goal is to get Zach LaVine to sign again. He's only 26. He's not even his prime yet. He's one of the best scorers in the league. I honestly think his ceiling is really, really high. And I think if they find another player to help him with that playmaking, they can go to the next level. I don't think their ceiling right now is going to be a championship. I think they may be second round at best if they get to the playoffs sometimes, if they get consistent enough. Because that's going to be a question as well. Because I know Vooch is consistent and I know Zach is consistent, but the rest of the team is very questionable. I would say that they do have tradable pieces because of Satoransky, that is young. You have Kobe White and Lauri Markkanen. Now, if you get those four together, you might be able to do some trades such as getting Buddy Hield and who else? Bagley over in Sacramento. I think that would add a playmaker at least. I think you can make a deal out of those players. What I mean by disgruntled starter, you could potentially offer the Wizards a similar deal. I mean, Kobe White is a decent player, and also Markkanen is a good player if he has the ball in his hands. And I think that might at least let them have a start off if they lose both Bradley Beal and Westbrook, because that's where it's leading. So I think that those are maybe the best options for them. I will say one option for point guard that I would keep an eye out on is Lonzo Ball. Lonzo Ball is a restricted free agent for the Pelicans, but it doesn't look like they're going to resign him because he's asking for more money. But I think that the Bulls can swing it that way if they can let go of Thaddeus Young and Sariskowski.
Gotcha. Now, I do agree. We've mentioned Lonzo Ball on previous episodes of this show. He's been linked to Chicago previously. I don't think he's going to end up staying in New Orleans because he did legitimately take a step forward. He's a promising young player. But I guess in terms of a hypothetical trade for a big name, well, they do. I think Kobe White and Lauri Markkanen are legitimate enough pieces where a team is going to be interested in them as young players who are still talented and could get better and still have the room to develop. I don't see Young or Satoransky being the defining pieces in a trade like that. I think they're more complementary pieces. The bigger concern I would have is just because they don't have two of their next three first round picks, that other teams who are looking to trade for a star that might have more assets could outbid the Bulls. And that might be a problem in itself. I'm not trying to say that it's a guarantee or it's a given or anything, but you could look at several teams around the league that have the cap space or have the extra draft picks that might be able to outbid them. I guess it depends on what these teams that are going to end up trading these guys are looking for. If they're looking for somewhat established players who are already in the league, or if they'd rather take a chance that those draft picks are going to be more valuable down the line. Because if they value the draft picks, I honestly don't see the Bulls making the best offer for the trade.
I would say a lot of the teams that could offer that would use the player the best. I would think the Bradley Beal traded would be that kind of example. The best teams that would really use him in the playoff scenario wouldn't really have that many pieces as it is. Their draft picks aren't that high. If you look at 1 through 30, what would you rate Lauri Markkanen as? I'd still say he's a top 15 pick even today. That's a good prospect. Same thing, Kobe White. I would take him a top 20. So you got to think of the teams that would want him, such as Philadelphia, which they don't really have draft picks, not very high ones, at least. You look at maybe the Lakers or something like that. They don't have draft picks, even though they are the teams that would use them the best. Otherwise, the player that's already disgruntled would be in another situation where they're disgruntled. So I feel like, yes, they could ship them off, but there's usually some type of loyalty sometimes when it comes to these teams, to these players. So they'll send them where they kind of want, especially they use a trade leverage where what Carmelo did when he went to the Knicks, he's like, I want to go to the Knicks. So the Knicks gave away the whole team. But that's the main thing about the trades. Yes, you can get more draft picks, but these players, what they can bring. And if you take them in the draft right now, they are like late lottery, almost top 15 picks. So you got to take that into account. I think they do have a decent trade offer only because you look at the expiring contracts too. It's for Thaddeus Young and Sadorkowski. That's nice as well for the next free agency season as well. I think they have a nice chance to get at least a Buddy Hield. I think that's definitely doable because they have young pieces.
They do definitely have some young players. I think it's just kind of an interesting thing to look at where now the team's trading these players away. It's a combination of if they've at least been loyal to us, we want to do right by them. But also, if especially considering a lot of these disgruntled players have 1 year left on their contract, we also need to send them somewhere where they will resign because we can get more for them. It's still a business at the end of the day. I think it's a combination of both. But we've talked about the Bulls who have made one trade for a pretty big name already pretty recently. There's going to be a lot of talk about them trying to make another. But let's switch over to a team that's already done that pretty recently, and that's the Brooklyn Nets, who James Harden's the trade I'm referring to, if anyone's a little fuzzy on that one. Now, similar to the Bulls, we're not really going to talk about the Nets draft too much. They do have their own first-round pick this year right now, which is going to be 27th overall. They also have 3 second-round picks, but I highly doubt the Nets are going to end up making 4 picks in this draft. I think they will trade a couple of those away. Now, the Nets are a relatively easy team to discuss in terms of it's the big three that all have one more guaranteed year left on their contracts of Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. They all have player options for 22, 23. So basically it's championship or bust for the Brooklyn Nets. There's no question about that. I'd say they were the favorite to make it out of the East, but in this season, but they unfortunately had some pretty severe injuries to 2 of their 3 big stars, where James Harden missed a few games and came back at the end of the Bucks series and wasn't 100%, and Kyrie Irving got hurt and did not come back in the series. And as amazing as Kevin Durant was, it was not enough for them to survive Milwaukee, even in that ridiculous Game 7. So if Kevin Durant had my feet, they would have advanced past Milwaukee, and who knows how far they could have advanced. But I think we can agree that if they stay even somewhat healthy next season, they're going to be an upper echelon team in the East. Now, the question that I would start with is, since those 3 are locked up to such huge contracts, and Joe Harris is on a pretty expensive deal as well, DeAndre Jordan, who didn't even play the last couple months of the season, really, he's getting about $10 million a year. The Nets are unlikely to be able to acquire any more big names unless they are willing to take big discounts to sign there and chase a ring. And that's definitely possible. So I guess where I'm going to start with a lot of the Nets players that came over this year, the Blake Griffins, Jeff Greens, Bruce Browns, guys like that. They are all free agents at the moment. Do you think any of them would be willing to take a league minimum or a mid-level exception or something like that to stick with the Nets?
I think out of those, I don't think there's a big market for Bruce Brown. I don't think he has that much of a pull. He really didn't play as much as he should have, I think, sometimes, because you can give the big three a break. I think they just repeat. I honestly think that Blake Griffin has no problem taking the league minimum to get back on the team again. I think they just go again. If they can possibly get rid of DeAndre Jordan's contract, that'd be really nice. So you can at least clear some cap space up. But at this point, there's really nothing they can do. They're locked in next year. There's nothing that they can really get out of it. They can maybe get Spencer Dinwiddie somewhere where they can maybe add a four, maybe add a big man, which would be really nice. But there's not really many on the market right now that is really worth it. I mean, you can maybe get a young prospect, and I'm just saying this because I'm a Magic fan. Maybe you can get Mo Bamba out of it. I don't know, because Mo Bamba is on the bench. He's not really doing much, but he's kind of that raw aspect that maybe you give him some minutes and does something.
And
Better than DeAndre Jordan.
yeah, Bamba would be an interesting yeah, comparable or I forgot what I was going to say there. A compliment to
Yeah.
Nick Claxton, who's the big man that's still in Brooklyn right now. And so we haven't mentioned it yet. The 7 guys who are under contract right now for the Nets are those big 3: Joe Harris, DeAndre Jordan, Landry Shamet is the one we haven't mentioned yet, and Nick Claxton. And Shamet, in fairness, got better as the season went along. He was at least a useful shooter. Joe Harris, as great as he was during the regular season, had a disappointing playoff run, but he's still clearly got value, especially in the modern NBA. He's an underrated defender as well. I would argue that Brooklyn is going to be looking for some perimeter defenders. They could use a little bit of help on that end of the court, but offensively, they're as set as it's going to get in the NBA. They got 3 huge stars who are all capable of scoring 50 points night in and night out. Well, we saw Durant do it a couple of times in the playoff series. So I guess one question that I would ask, so you mentioned Dinwiddie. I think he's going to be one of the biggest question marks on Brooklyn's offseason right now. And the Nets had a ton of injuries throughout the whole regular season. They had some in the playoffs as well. And Dinwiddie was kind of the start of that trend. He got hurt, I think, 3 games into the season with a partially torn ACL and didn't come back. And he's definitely a very, very good player who is capable of complementing these guys. But at the same time, I don't see him coming back. I don't see him wanting a bench role behind Kyrie Irving and James Harden. So do you think a sign and trade is the most likely option for Spencer Dinwiddie?
I believe so. I believe that he wants a good amount of money that Brooklyn doesn't even have. So there's no really chance that they're going to get Spencer Dinwiddie to return. You brought up the trade with the Bulls. That's a really interesting option if they can get somebody like Markkanen. Just go all in on offense. Be the best offensive team in the history of the NBA, where you score 180 points, but you also let them score 170. Because they're going to have trouble on defense, but at least they can get something from Dinwiddie. I don't think they keep Dinwiddie at all.
I don't think they have the financial resources to do so. It's not that they don't want to, but there's going to be a lot of interest in Dinwiddie around the league from teams who are desperate for point guards or just teams that are desperate for a guy who could be either a number 1 or more realistically a number 2 scoring option. And in Brooklyn, best case, he's a number 4 or number 5, considering Joe Harris is going to be relied on for scoring to a limited extent as well. So and Dinwiddie, considering he's probably going to get at least 20 million a year on the open market, he's going to get that somewhere else. I think the Nets are smart enough. Sean Marks is an aggressive GM who made some pretty bold moves this season, obviously with the Harden trade and last year trading for Shamet and Bruce Brown on draft night when they had the 19th pick. He's not going to be afraid, but he's also going to get value for somebody before just saying, hey, you know what? You're pretty good, but we're going to just let you walk away. The Nets are too smart for that. I know they have limited leverage financially, but there is enough teams that are going to be interested in Dinwiddie where they can still have some sort of bidding war, even where they're going to get something of value, whether it's a young player, whether it's a couple of draft picks to free up some payroll, it's going to happen. But Bruce Brown is the next one I wanted to mention, if you're okay with that, because while you mentioned he didn't have a huge role during the season, he did actually have a slightly bigger role in the playoffs. And a few episodes back, we mentioned that he was being used as in the pick and roll a lot as a roll man, which is really interesting as a guy who's 6'4", but he was surprisingly effective at the role. I think Steve Nash really found a way to use him creatively. He is a restricted free agent. So how much of an offer do you think it would take on another team to pry him away? Because I do think Brooklyn would prioritize him the most of their free agents that are on the team already right now.
I honestly don't see him getting more than 10. I think that he gets less than 10. He showed a little bit during the playoffs, but not enough to be, up to the 15 mark. Because if you say he's up to the 15 mark, it's saying that he's similar to a Joe Harris in production, and that's not true. Because Joe Harris is making 17 next year. He made 16 this year.
Mhm.
So I think he makes maybe 10. If they overpaid, maybe 11, maybe 12 at the most. And that's overpaying, in my opinion, because he's good and he was good during the playoffs, but again, if you have somebody who takes all the attention on the offense, like Kevin Durant, it's not that hard to look good around him. It's kind of the same thing with LeBron James when he made everybody around him look very good when he was on Cavs. I don't think he has a lot to ask for on the market. I think probably under 10, and I think that they just match because there's no reason why you would really get rid of him at this point because you don't have really any cap room to get anybody else. So
No, they don't. And I do think that they would match offers up to a reasonable extent. I think a team would really have to be desperate and throw in like a poison pill, extra money on the second or third year. We've seen that happen before. Well, we'll get into the Knicks in a minute, but they've done it a couple of times. Tim Hardaway Jr. was a restricted free agent from Atlanta. Knicks gave him a very big contract to basically force Atlanta not to match. And I think a team, if they're really that desperate for Bruce Brown, would have to do something similar to that. Going the other way, when Jeremy Lin was with the Knicks, he was a restricted free agent, and Houston gave him the big contract, where the third year was worth, I want to say, $15 million, basically forcing the Knicks not to match. They really wanted him. They gave him a contract the Knicks couldn't match. We could see something like that. But I think Bruce Brown, as much as I like him, his ceiling is a role player. Now, that's a role player that's still useful on a contending team. He was used pretty creatively by the end of the season. So he's definitely got value, but you also can't expect him to all of a sudden develop into a guy who's going to create a bunch of shots for himself. He's more of a glue guy, I think. So I don't see a team, and there's not many that could afford to even give him a huge contract right now. Most teams don't have cap space, but the ones that do, for the most part, are teams that are mediocre to bad in the NBA right now. And I don't see one of them being desperate enough to say, hey, we think you're all of a sudden going to turn into Jeremy Grant. Let's give you $20 million. I just don't see it. So I think he's most likely to stick around. I could see Blake Griffin taking the league minimum because let's not forget, he is still being paid $30 million a year by the Pistons right now.
That's very true. Honestly, that whole situation was strange. I think he signs again because at this point in his career, he's not that big on the market anymore. I mean, he finally dunked when he was on the Brooklyn Nets, and that was a celebration moment because he dunked, the basic dunk, not even something special. So at this point in time, he doesn't really have the athleticism like he used to. He's kind of like Derrick Rose, but he never really gained a shot like Derrick Rose, right? So he doesn't really have much of a market anymore. I think he just stays and try to get a ring.
And I think it would be a wise move for him. And Brooklyn's definitely a good spot for anyone who's looking to chase a ring right now. There's a couple of teams, if anyone gets bought out, similar to Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge briefly last year, Brooklyn's going to be at the front of the line for people who are looking to sign at the end of the year for a couple of months, see if they can get a ring out of it. And Blake Griffin is still getting paid plenty of money. It doesn't have to be from the Nets. And I don't think the athleticism is entirely gone for him. He showed flashes of it in the playoffs, but he's not going to be the same player he was with the Clippers, obviously. But at the same time, if he's your fourth, fifth, even sixth option, he's a damn good fourth, fifth, or sixth option that is capable of being more than that for a couple of games if one of these players gets hurt or just is rested for a couple of games, something like that. So yeah, if you can get any sort of occasional offense out of him more consistently in a hypothetical like that, he's going to be worth a lot more than league minimum as long as you can keep him healthy. And that's been the bigger issue for Blake Griffin in recent years. Now, I know we won't harp on it too much for the Nets, but let's say that they do keep the 27th pick. I think they're going to be looking to add either some more shooting, considering that's at a premium in the NBA, or somebody who can at least help them on the defensive end where they admittedly struggle compared to their offense. Are there any targets you think they might be going for at the end of the first round?
Honestly, Zaire Williams would be interesting. A lot of people say Dayron Sharp would be our option, and that's fine as well. I don't think that they're really going to pick anybody that is going to add a lot of value at the beginning. It's probably going to be somebody on the bench that can soak up some time to give the big three a rest. At this point, it's kind of a whatever pick. I don't think they really care about this pick at all. Only because again, it's all about this big three. Past this big three, they would have to do the complete rebuild again. And they don't really have a lot of picks to do so. Not like, what the Rockets have right now.
Mhm.
But I think those are the two options. Maybe Daron Sharp or Zaire. I'd like to see Zaire on that team because I think he would learn really well from the big three. So that'd be interesting.
I could see them either doing that, or I think they might be going for somebody who's just backup insurance to one of those big threes. So somebody who could take over, play a few minutes, hopefully with the other two big stars healthy, let's say, if one's getting a night off or gets injured. So, for example, if Kyrie Irving's getting rested, I could see them going for a guy like Ayu Dosunmu out of Illinois, where he could
Okay.
step in, play a few minutes, but also in that situation have Harden and Durant who would be able to take all the pressure off of him. They just need somebody who could fill in capably enough, considering all the talents around him. You could do the same thing if it's Durant, get a guy like Jeremiah Robinson Earl or Quentin Grimes, somebody who's capable of making a few 3-pointers, can play some decent defense, and then can return to the complementary role once the star comes back. Yeah, so I think it's just about having a little bit more depth and a little bit of insurance. That's all they'd be looking for with that pick, in my mind. Or if they're really confident enough where they can keep enough of their guys around. I know we haven't really touched on Jeff Green. I feel like he's the one who might end up signing somewhere else because I think
Yeah.
he's earned more than a minimum contract, and I think he will get it from someone. He was very solid for the Nets in what they asked him to do. So I think, yeah, he's a guy who could get a contract somewhere else. I'm not saying anything crazy, but do you see that as a possibility?
I think so. He's a journeyman. He's been on like every single team. He's always been the trade piece, like a complimentary piece. He is what he is. Inconsistent, but can go for 50 any night. I think that he has earned at least more than league minimum. I think he can join another team if he wants to. I would say at this point in his career, if it would be smart for him to just stay. I don't think he's the reliable top three option on offense. I think that he could be a fourth option. Like I said, he can spark fire and go off. And if that's the case, that's fine. But he's so inconsistent that it's not somebody you want as a top option. And I think honestly, staying with Brooklyn is the best bet to get a championship. But if he's trying to chase the money, which I don't think is very much, he can go to a different team, most definitely.
I think he would be the guy that would have a little bit more value on the open market just because there's not a team in the league that couldn't use him somehow just because he's a versatile defender, is a consistent guy night in, night out on that end of the court, and is a good locker room guy, relatively consistent. So I could see something happening there. That he would have a relatively big market, but not for a ton of money. But there would be teams
Mhm.
interested in him. Now, let's go ahead and transition over to my favorite team. Last one before we get into the mock drafts here, and that's the New York Knicks, of course, who I'm as always cynical as hell about. But the Knicks are coming off a surprisingly good season. They were not expected to make the playoffs this season. They ended up fourth seed, a disappointing first round exit, but overall surprisingly positive energy coming from the Knicks after, for the most part, 2 decades of being terrible. And it is a little bit of a nice change of pace, but there's a lot of questions on what they're going to do as well. At the moment, the Knicks have the 19th, 21st picks in the first round, and then they have 32 and 58 in the second round. So I don't expect them to make 4 picks similar to Brooklyn. I see them making 2 or 3. Now, one of the things that we've talked about and that's being talked about in the media a lot, similar to the Magic, the Knicks have 2 picks that are relatively close together. I think they're going to try to trade up somewhere in the 10 to 14 range with the 19th and 21st picks. Do you see the Knicks doing that, or do you think they have the assets to pull that off?
I think they do have the assets to pull that off, but you would have to get rid of some good pieces, good young pieces like Obi Toppin. You would have to probably get rid of maybe Mitch Robinson in that deal as well, and even maybe RJ Barrett, depending on how far you want to go up. There is a couple trades that I think might happen. You could get the pick from the Warriors. They do have the 14th pick. I think that's obtainable. The one that I saw earlier, I don't know exactly when this they had that, but there was an interesting piece that the New Orleans Pelicans might get rid of Eric Bledsoe in 10th pick, so they might shred off contract, that dreadful contract, and maybe get active in the free agency and get rid of the 10th pick on top of that. I might that might be a good option for the 19th and 20th pick because you can get a lot of solid pieces at the 10th. I mean, you can get Corey Kispert or something at the 10th. But I think maybe the trading, I think those are two options. Because the other teams, I think they keep their option because you have Charlotte, San Antonio, and Indiana. Indiana's rebuilding, Charlotte's kind of rebuilding, San Antonio's rebuilding. I don't think they get rid of their pick. You might get it from Sacramento if you take Bagley.
Yeah, and I don't see the Knicks doing that, honestly. I think the Pacers, they're a team that you might be able to point at and say they could trade their pick because the Pacers are a team that underachieved this year, but they have a relatively talented roster if they're able to stay healthier next season. If they're able to get Brogdon back on the court, get a full season of Karis LeVert, TJ Warren, who missed pretty much the whole year, in addition to Sabonis and Miles Turner, I could see them getting right back into the playoffs with or without the 13th pick. So I don't think it's impossible the Knicks try to trade up there. Golden State, since they have 7 and 14, I definitely think that's a realistic target. I could definitely see the Knicks trading up to 14. And I honestly think 19 and 21 might be enough to get 14 by itself. The Warriors wouldn't really be looking for any of the Knicks' younger players. I think they'd be looking for established players to win right now because they're going to be getting Klay Thompson back next year. And they're going to be, I think, a contender in the Western Conference, assuming that happens. So they're definitely one to keep an eye on. The New Orleans one is really interesting. If they're that desperate to get rid of Bledsoe's contract, do you think 10 and Bledsoe for 19 and 21 could happen?
I think it definitely could happen only because Bledsoe's already said publicly how much he doesn't want to be there. You might be able to get a little spark with him playing in Madison Square Garden. That's a playmaker that you kind of need. I know the Knicks do need a point guard that can be a playmaker facilitator. Alfred Payton is not the answer. But having Bledsoe isn't bad as a solid option, and you get the 10th pick. With the 10th pick, you can get a lot of different things, such as getting a good center to go with Julius Randle there. You got RJ Barrett, who's developing. He's a solid scorer now. But then you can get maybe a 2 to complement him. There's a lot of things you can do in this draft at that 10th pick. So if New Orleans is willing to do it, I think you just pull the trigger, even if it costs you maybe Kevin Knox, or maybe it costs you Robinson. You can probably get a good center or at least a big man in the draft at the 10th pick to at least supplement that, and you get a point guard on top of it. So you kind of solve 2 birds in 1 stone there.
I would definitely be willing to get rid of Knox at this point. I wasn't a big fan of that pick when it happened. I wanted Michael Porter Jr. And it's easy for me to say, I was right about that one 3 years later, but I don't try to just brag about the ones I get right. But that one just seemed like a pretty obvious mistake at the time. And Knox has had diminishing roles in each of his 3 seasons with the Knicks. He wasn't in the rotation this year. If any team wants to take a chance on him, I'm okay throwing him in a trade package. Now, Mitchell Robinson, I really do like him. The thing with Robinson, I want to talk about him specifically for a second. He is a very, very good defensive center who can rebound when he's healthy. He's just had a lot of injury problems. He doesn't add a lot on the offensive end outside of the lob, but he's a really interesting case. Now, he is one of the few players, 2nd round pick a few years ago. The Knicks got great value from him. There's no question there. He has a team option left on his contract for this upcoming season. Now, the Knicks, if they pick that up, he becomes an unrestricted free agent next season, since he was a 2nd round pick. Robinson is very, very talented and one of the best shot blockers in the league when he's healthy. But considering his injury history, he might not be someone the Knicks are willing to commit a long-term contract to. So if whether the Knicks end up picking 19th or if they move up to 13 or whatever, if they are not comfortable with Robinson, I think it's a strong possibility they go for a guy like an Isaiah Jackson who could be the long-term successor to Mitchell Robinson if they're not comfortable committing the money to him. Do you think that's a possibility?
I definitely think it's a possibility. I think that they might move on from him only because of the injury history. And not only that, but he would command a decent amount and the free agency market there once he becomes a restricted or unrestricted free agent. My only concern with him is in today's league, outside of DeAndre Ayton, you need a big that can shoot, that can space the floor. It's pace and space nowadays. And if you can't do that, you don't perform well anymore. We see Andre Drummond, who is the same kind of player, but he can't really find a team right now because he doesn't play the new style of NBA. Your Jokic, your Embiids, who can shoot the long ball and also can drive to the rim and dunk on you. That's, the versatile player. Porzingis, which everybody thought he was going to be, but then he kind of stepped back from his role. But that's what you kind of need nowadays, and that's not what he brings to the table. I think Isaiah Jackson is a decent fit. I like Trey Murphy myself. That's somebody who I'd really like, and I think that would be a really good pick. But Isaiah Jackson would be a good successor.
Yeah, there's the Knicks are in a spot where they can pick almost any position and you could talk yourself into it, except for power forward right now. And they definitely need some help at the point guard spot. That seems to have been true for decades. It's definitely something they're going to look at in the draft. I think they're going to be more likely to try to sign someone in free agency or make a trade for a disgruntled star. The Knicks do have the assets to do that right now, but I do not see them including RJ Barrett in a trade right now. I really don't think they want to get rid of him under any circumstances. Now, we'll see if that ends up being true, but he definitely took a step forward in the second year. If the Knicks end up keeping 19 and 21, I definitely think Trey Murphy would be one of the picks. I really do. I think his shooting would be a fantastic fit because the Knicks, while they ended up finishing surprisingly high in 3-point percentage, they didn't have a lot of offensive depth. And you knew that, like, once it became clear that they were actually going to be a playoff team, you knew that was going to be a problem once they got there. Even if they did survive the first round, they would not have gotten any further. We agreed on that off the pod. I think most Knicks fans knew that they weren't supposed to get this far. In best case, they beat the Hawks and then lose to Philly or Brooklyn or whoever in the second round, right?
Yeah,
So,
which
and that's still a huge, a huge improvement over the last few years. And the Knicks right now can actually set themselves up or sell themselves as a team. Hey, we're actually building something. We're on the right track for once. You can help us get over the top. Selling themselves to any trade market guys or any free agents. It's a refreshing change from saying, look, I know we suck, but hey, we can give you more money. So please try to make us relevant again, which is basically what happened with Julius Randle, except he exploded this year and it kind of happens. So if
yeah.
and Julius Randle's another guy I want to talk about in a minute, but keeping the focus on the draft for now, if they end up picking in the 10 to 14 range, I think there's a couple guys that they would go for. I think Kispert might be a target because of his shooting. I think they might go for a Davion Mitchell if they get really high. I don't see them getting higher than the 10th pick, and I don't think Mitchell would last that far. But if they do make a trade for the Warriors pick at 7, I could see them trying to go for Mitchell right there. I think that would be unlikely. I don't think the Warriors would want to get rid of that pick unless they get an established star in a different trade. And the Knicks aren't going to be sending Randall back for that. So I'd be more surprised, but I think Mitchell would fit really well also. Now, if we pick at 19, he's not really a shooter, but he can play make. And that's Sharif Cooper out of Auburn. I really, really like him. What do you think? Do you think he would be a target if the Knicks stay where they are?
Honestly, in my mock draft, in the perfect world for the Knicks, that would be the two choices. You get Sharif Cooper and you get Trey Murphy. I think that would be the perfect situation because Sharif Cooper, in my opinion, is the best pure point guard in the draft. He is the best pure passer. He's an old school passer. He's not much of a scorer, which you don't need because you have RJ Barrett and you have Julius Randle, and you have Trey Murphy who can also space the floor because he's an excellent shooter as well. So I think in the perfect world, if you keep those picks, that's what you get. Now, if they do trade up, there are different options in there. I think Kispert's really nice. Maybe Moses Moody, it may be a option for them. And those are two options that they might go for. Chris Duarte is somebody who might be pretty nice for them. I like Josh Giddey. I think that might be a good point, a playmaker for them as well. But if they stay with the 19th and 21st, I think that's the perfect world. Sharif Cooper, Trey Murphy. I think the Knicks fans should be happy because I would be very, very happy with that.
Honestly, I would be happy with it as well, but I do think the Knicks are going to end up trading into that 10 to 14 range with the picks instead. And I think Duarte would be the target if they do that. Now, Duarte is a very good shooter. He's a little older. He's 24, so he doesn't have quite the same ceiling theoretically that one of these 19-year-olds would have, but he would come in and fit a need right away. And he's rising up draft boards. So if the Knicks do move up into the end of the lottery, I think that's the range where Duarte is going to end up going. You can definitely make sense of the pick. Now, Yeah, really quickly, since we're running long a little bit here, and no pun on Emmanuel quickly was intended there. I know that's what you were thinking. But there are four guys that the Knicks had this season that all had very good years that are free agents, and I just wanted to get a quick opinion on how many of them you think are brought back, and that's Derrick Rose, Alec Burks, Reggie Bullock, and Nerlens Noel. I personally think Noel has gone one way or the other, not because he wasn't good for the Knicks. He had a very good year, but because I think he priced himself out of the Knicks range. They have Robinson still, and they might draft somebody with one of these picks to replace him. So I think he's unlikely to be brought back. But the other three, Rose, that will end up getting done. I think Bullock might end up being cheaper than Alec Burks, just because he doesn't have quite that same shot creating potential. They're both capable of hitting a bunch of threes, but Burks can create his own shot and distribute a little bit. I don't think Bullock can, but he is somebody who could be had for a cheaper contract. So I think two of the three will end up coming back. I'm not sure which two yet, but those are the four key free agents that were so vital to the Knicks having their unexpectedly solid season. So I think Noel's going to price himself out. Now he's not really an offensive threat either, but his shot blocking and rebounding is still really valuable. And since he's not like a Drummond type where he has got a good post game, old school, he can fit in the modern NBA. Same with Robinson, better than a guy who has the skill set of Andre Drummond at this point in his career. So not that they can space the floor, but the athleticism and shot blocking does make an impact. And to wrap up this episode really quick here before we get out of here, wanted to give the listeners our mock draft for the top 10 picks of this NBA draft, which is going to be later today when this drops on Thursday here. So for the purposes of this episode, we're not going to put any trades in the top 10, though I think we agree there's going to be at least one in the actual draft. But start up right up the top. I'm assuming we both have Cade Cunningham going first to the Pistons, right?
Yes, 100%. There's no question.
And do you think there's any doubt that he's the best player in the draft?
I think that he has a skill set of, someone who's been a veteran. I think that his athleticism and his quickness off the dribble is a little questionable, but overall, he's the clear-cut number one.
Yeah, I don't think he's the most dynamic athlete in the world, but he does have an incredibly well-rounded game and somebody who's, I think, got the poise to make an impact right away. And I thought it might be fun to throw in a quick player comp, or at least guys we see shades of in their game. So for Cade Cunningham, I wrote down an interesting one here, and that's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, just from the point guard spot. Okay. I see some shades of him in Cade Cunningham. I wanted to get your thoughts on that one, or if you had a guy.
I like that. I like that. That's nice. That's nice. I thought about it, and I see what we all thought Sean Livingston was going to be.
Ooh, I
right.
like that one.
I know that Cade is getting better at his shot, but he's not very good overall. He's not like a knockdown shooter, but I see that Sean Livingston, real lengthy, real tall, real long, can do a lot of ball handling, and it's crazy at his height. I think that's what he reminds me of Sean Livingston.
Man, I got to tell you, just as a fan, I fucking love Sean Livingston when he
Yeah.
was a player. I respected how much he came back from the injury. What a
Right.
surprisingly underrated piece he was to that Warriors championship team. I don't think he got enough respect. And I do see some of that in his game. A surprisingly big and lengthy point guard who's got
Mhm.
a better skill set than he's given credit for. And, but I do like that one. I would not have come up with that one. I got to give you props there, man. But
Appreciate it.
second one. Now, I mentioned my comp for Jalen Green. That's who I have going second to Houston at the moment.
Hmm.
Now, I mentioned the shades of Zach LaVine and Malik Monk earlier. I see a little bit of those two, but we agree Green is this incredibly explosive athlete. I'd say the most dynamic athlete in the draft, or at least at the top
Hmm.
with the immediate impact offensively. I think he would be a really, really solid fit in Houston, especially if they have John Wall for another year to take some of the pressure off of him. Who do you have going second to the Rockets?
Honestly, I have them taking Jalen Green as well. I thought about maybe they go with Mobley, but they already have Christian Wood there. Jalen Green, he reminds me of a Froby, somebody whose shot's kind of raw. I mean, it can get there, but he's really athletic. He just dunks on everybody. But the thing about Jalen Green that I do appreciate is he can score at any level. Three-level scorer. He can go from the three to the mid range to the inside the bucket. He can do it all. His defense is kind of questionable, but one thing I'll say about him that is really special is that he did play in the G League. So kind of like Luka, how he played against grown men in Europe, Jalen Green also played against grown men and averaged 18 points. So that's also a solid pick.
No, he really, really developed as a scorer. I thought the G League was a good move for him, make a little bit of money, and it's not going to impact his draft status in a negative way at all. No, it hasn't impacted his draft
No.
status in a negative way at all. Now, you mentioned Christian Wood. I actually see some shades of him in my next pick, and that's Evan Mobley to the Cavaliers at 3. I do see a little bit of that. 7-footer who can space the floor, has a little bit of potential as a go-to scorer. I think we agree Mobley's going to be an impact defensive player right away. Now, when Cleveland made the trade for Jared Allen, I'm still not 100% convinced that he won't be the center of the future. But either way, Evan Mobley could definitely fit alongside him. So that's who I have going third at Cleveland. Who do you have?
I also have Evan Mobley going third because they're going to replace Jared Allen. I don't think Jared Allen stays for the long haul. I don't think that that's their guy. Evan Mobley has the potential of being the go-to scorer. I know that he's a little raw. His shot's a little raw, and I know that he's a little raw inside the paint right now when it comes to his post game. But I think that it can get tightened up a little bit. And he can be the go-to scorer. He does have a really light touch around the rim, and he's a good defender. He's a good rebounder. I think he goes third. There's no question about it.
Now, since it sounds like we're going to have the same first few picks here, we'll speed
Yeah.
it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Fourth, I got Jalen Suggs going to
I do too.
Toronto.
I
Yeah,
do
you got,
too.
and fifth, I have Scotty Barnes going to
I do
Orlando.
too. I do
Yeah, I
too.
figured we'd be the same there. Now, this
Hmm.
is where I think it might be a little bit of a differential. So, really quick, I'll give you the quick shades for those two. For Suggs, I have shades of Billups and Brandon Roy. And for Scotty
Okay.
Barnes, I have a little bit of Siakam in his game. That's the only one I could think of. He's a little bit of a tougher one.
So I say Suggs is close to a Jason Kidd. I see
I
him
like.
as a playmaker that is raw shooting, but he's a really good playmaker. He playing as a quarterback as well,
Yeah.
but does help him with his play vision. Scotty Barnes reminds me of Jonathan Isaac.
Well, yeah, that I mean,
Jonathan
just
Isaac.
like you said, you want two Jonathan Isaacs on the Magic earlier, right?
Exactly. I
Now,
just
number
wanted the
six, this
meme.
is one where I think might switch it up a little bit. I'm really high on this guy. I could see OKC going for him. I got James Bouknight out of UConn going here. I think he's going to go higher than people think. He's a guy I think pretty explosive, kind of a lesser version of Jalen Green to an extent. He's got a really good handle. I could see him being an interesting backcourt piece and a compliment to SGA in Oklahoma City. Who do you have going here?
I I honestly have them taking Kaminga here. I don't
Mm,
think Kaminga falls that far. Honestly, having Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and having Kaminga as a second option instead of the primary option, or at least trying to be the primary option, I think that might be the best bet because Kaminga has the biggest upside in this draft. He has a high ceiling. We have no idea what he's going to be like, right? He has a crazy athleticism. He played against grown men at 18, so we can't grade him too hardly on the G League. I know he didn't score very well, at least efficiently, and I know his defense was very questionable, but he's young. They can build upon that. And OKC at this point, you might as well just build with young, hit out the park players.
Now, the seventh pick is a really interesting one to me if Golden State keeps it. I want you to start this one. Who do you see Golden State picking if they end up keeping the number seven pick?
If they keep the number seventh pick, I honestly have them going Moody. Because Moses Moody is one that doesn't need the ball in his hands. He has Klay Thompson. He has Steph there. They're really, really trying hard to get I believe Bradley Beal there. I know that Steph really wants him. If they get another backup guard that can help them score and move Klay to the three and have Moses Moody there that doesn't really need the ball in his hand. He can shoot three. He can shoot the mid range. He's good. He's a catch and shoot player.
Now, I ended up putting Moody as well. I thought about Corey Kispert because he also doesn't need the ball in his hand, but I think Moody will be the pick just because the better athleticism there. Now, eighth, I think we agreed on this one, actually. I do have Davion Mitchell going to Orlando if they keep the pick. We talked about that earlier. I'm assuming you have the same, right?
Yes, I have Davion Mitchell. He's going to be their go-to point guard.
I really do like him. Now, two more here before we wrap this one up. Number 9, the Sacramento Kings. This is actually where I have Kispert going at the moment. If I don't think they're going to end up keeping the pick, I have a feeling Sacramento is going to end up trading it for a player who can try to help them win right now, especially if they end up getting rid of Buddy Hield, which is possible. They get somebody who can hopefully complement De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton in the backcourt. But I think Kispert would be a good fit as somebody who can space the floor, provide a little depth if Buddy Hield's there or not. Somebody who can definitely take a little bit of attention off them and open up some room for the guards. Who do you have going?
I honestly have I have James Bouknight going to Sacramento. I think that they don't keep Buddy Hield. I think they need a guard that can really take over other than Tyrese Halliburton. And I think James Bouknight is the one that could play the 2 or the 1 and can thrive in that system.
I really, really like Bouknight. I have a feeling he's going to be gone by this spot. I don't think I'm going to be the only team that's going to fall in, or well, the only person, I guess. I'm not a team that can fall in love with the explosiveness, and they'll take a chance on him, even because he's a relatively polished athlete, considering how explosive he is. So I think somebody's going to give him a shot because he might have a relatively high instant impact. Last pick here before we wrap this one up, number 10, New Orleans. If they keep the pick, considering how ball dominant Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram can be, they need the ball in their hands. I think it's similar logic. Get somebody who can thrive off the ball. And I mentioned his draft stock was rising, so I have Chris Duarte going in this spot. I think he'd be a good compliment.
Yeah.
Who do you have?
I got Corey Kispert being here because he's the same reason. Same reason, better shooter. You have him going earlier, so that makes sense. For me, I got him going 10th to New Orleans because he can be alongside Zion and not need the ball at all.
Exactly. It's really similar logic. You can see, obviously, Zion's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. So you got to get somebody who can play off of him. And that normally means guys who can catch and shoot from the outside. And both of those guys fit the bill. So if New Orleans does keep the pick, if they don't end up trading it to get rid of Bledsoe's albatross of a contract, that's definitely a guy who would make some sense. So I know we're both really excited to see how the draft does unfold on Thursday night. Both of our teams have 2 picks in the first round, which is a little different. So, and we both kind of expect them to make a trade up, or at least expect them to try. So it's kind of interesting to see some parallels here because the Knicks have definitely been in the Magic's position for most of the last decade, but they have not had the same number of intriguing pieces. They've been mostly piecing it together with the Emmanuel Mudiay's of the world, and it's not quite the same. So it is nice to see. The Magic are definitely a team that have some young, intriguing pieces. The Knicks right now are slightly less young, I'd say. They rely a little bit more on veteran guys, but that you can actually sell as a free agency thing now. So it's really interesting. If any listeners go back and listen to us talk about these teams last year when we started the show compared to now, it really is a surprise for both of them. I would say they've changed a lot, but I'm really excited for Thursday night. I'm hoping the Knicks don't fuck it up, but they still got to earn the benefit of the doubt. One good season isn't enough after 2 decades of terrible, but I can't thank you enough for coming on, Johnny, and talking basketball with us. I hope you enjoyed it. You're always welcome to come back and talk more Magic if you want after the draft.
Oh, it was a great time. Thank you so much for having me on. I love talking sports with you. We talk every day at work. So
we do it both on and off the pod now.
Yeah. I would love to come back whenever you guys would have me. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, for listeners, we want to thank you guys for tuning in as well. Please, this is out on all platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Play, everything. Please leave us a rating and a review and a like. Any feedback that you have, any agreements, disagreements that you have with what we said about our teams and the prospects that are going to be picked. We definitely appreciate any feedback that you guys would give us. So if you have any thoughts, or if you think I'm way fucking crazy on something, please let me know. I would definitely be interested in having that conversation. And if anyone else has some thoughts on the top 10 mock that we did, or if they have any creative trade ideas, please go ahead and let us know. We definitely want to get some outside opinions on that. But we want to thank everyone for tuning in. This has been the Big City Sports Podcast. Next week, we're going to be recapping the draft in both the NBA and the NHL, and some free agency news in both sports as well. So keep an eye out for that. And Dylan should be back with us next week. So we'll look forward to getting you guys back for that one. But thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time.